You two take care of labor.
Only intended for a plane captain.
You don't want to die of cold. Toll free.
What the hell?
When I was growing up, we didn't have Netflix or any other subscription media. Instead, we would go to these rental stores for movies. Going there was always my favorite time of the week, getting to see all those movies on the stands and being excited to discover something new. But every time I would enter the store, I would have to close my eyes because the horror section was right at the door. And I was petrified of those DVD covers, especially the ones of the Saw franchise that had all those different body parts sliced on the cover. It was not until I was around 13 that I plucked up the courage to finally watch a horror movie. Or rather, I was talked into it. 4 AM at a Halloween party. After having played Just Dance for far too long, we decided to watch the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street. I could still remember those horrifying covers in the rental stores that I couldn't stand looking at. And while everyone was hugging their pillows and momentarily hiding behind them, I was just looking at the screen, surprised about how little that movie actually scared me. Or made me feel anything really. So I was curious to find out if I really could be scared. It was there that I began my foray into the different arts of horror. I watched some of the classics, some really good movies that I genuinely got scared by, and through that, I discovered the Alien franchise. As I watched the first Alien movie, I became enamored by the art style, the slow build of tension and suspense, the mysterious question of how that spaceship even got there, and the grotesque undertones of the monster itself. And I wanted more. After playing through Alien Isolation and left craving for more, I discovered Scorn, a game that looked like the child of H.R. Giger's disturbed mind and the worthy successor to the first Alien movie. I was naturally very excited and kept a close eye on the game's development throughout the many years, eagerly awaiting for its release. And in October, there it was. But as I finished Scorn, I became numb. There was an emptiness in me. I felt like the game's character, roaming around in a seemingly empty desert with no end in sight. And as I overcame that numbness, I felt nor sad nor angry, just mildly disappointed. Established in 2013, EBB Software was born with the goal of creating different experiences in the gaming landscape. And while brainstorming for a new project, Scorn was born. Later, in 2014, a Kickstarter campaign was launched, announcing the game and trying to raise funds for development. The campaign turned out to be unsuccessful, not being able to reach its main goal. Luckily, this wasn't the end for Scorn, later receiving private funding from an investor. With this, full production commenced. Little was shown throughout the years, with a few teasers and early alpha trailers popping here and there to keep up the hype. After a few delays, the game was finally released in October 2022. The best way I can describe Scorn is of a full immersion in one of H.R. Giger's arts. At first glance, there isn't a traditional story here, and dialogue is barely a thing. Much like it was promised, Scorn isn't really like any other game. It wants to provoke you, take your imagination and toy with it. It's disturbingly twisted, and infused with all kinds of genitalia and sexual imagery, even down to its little details. Unlike more conventional games, Scorn is a journey without a clear path, just a set of obtuse labyrinths with no obvious where or what. It wants you as deep in this disgusting world as the creature you're playing as. It wants you powerless and afraid of whatever is out there.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
You see, it all starts with a baby, we'll say at the age of 6 months, and the mother says, boo, and scares the hell out of the baby, gives it the hiccups, and then the baby giggles. There's its first moment of fear. Later on, it's on a swing, getting higher and higher, and catching its breath when it goes too high. And so it goes. We all enjoy, shall we say, putting our toe in the cold water of fear.
Now, before I go any further in analyzing the game, I would like to take a brief look at the depths of fear. After all, this is a horror game, and the biggest thing that it wants from you is that you experience a tiny shred of that tingling feeling that is being afraid. Fear is one of our most basic emotions, and it's something we experience on a daily basis. It's been part of humanity for many centuries, through bone-chilling tales that would run from mouth to movies, books, and eventually, video games. Fear is something that you feel when you go to pay with your card, but it keeps getting rejected, or when you remembered about that pen that you left in the kitchen that just might start a fire. It protects us, alerts us from danger, and it can come with many intensities as well. But many of us also enjoy to feel a little bit of that danger. We get an adrenaline rush that triggers the body's fight, flight, or freeze response. And in turn, we also feel more active and in total control of our actions, and that can be quite exhilarating and exciting. Naturally, visual media like cinema and video games is a great way to experience that, albeit in a safe environment without having to go through a real dangerous situation. When I was researching about this game and why is it scary, I wondered, why do we engage in these actions and why do we enjoy putting ourselves in these situations of fear? There are many answers to this question, like we get a sense of control, we feel an adrenaline rush, we conquer fears, and get an emotional payback. But ultimately, in the case of Scorn, it's more about escapism. The focus is not really around gameplay that leaves you stumbling to find more ammo, and afraid of what enemies you might find next. It's also not a scary tale about a cult or a tragic set of events. It's really about the world that surrounds you, something far removed from this world, but when you take a closer look, it's strikingly similar. It plays with our fear of the unknown and the unexpected, and all of this is masterfully handled by the visuals. I really need to hand it to the team. They really excelled in this particular category. The graphics, presentation, and art are out of this world, quite literally, and they elevated the experience to another level. I felt so immersed in this world with all the little details and care put into everything you see. The visual detail was so masterfully crafted that even with my big frustrations with the gameplay and the story shortcomings, I still kept going because the curiosity to discover what I would see next was far too exciting. According to the game director, the idea was to study the space jockey, the mysterious spacecraft from the original Alien. Naturally, they also took inspiration from artists like H.R. Giger, and the next name I cannot pronounce, so I will show you on the screen, to the extent that their paintings come to life in this game. So the game ends up being a mix between those macabre deviant arts and the film Alien, sprinkled with phallic and deeply sexual imagery. The game really goes out of its way to present you with scenarios and things that you have never seen or imagined. Every room is like its own painting that could be taken apart from the whole thing and it would still be appreciated. All the grim, Geiger-esque environments are there to provoke you, and the architecture of this place tells its own story, even more so than the own narrative of the game. You can see on the walls pictures or moments of suffering and sacrifice, revealing that you're not the first one to set foot into this place and to have this miserable experience. The number of time-consuming details that this world was packed with was very impressive. It's the sort of things that most people will likely walk by and not notice. The animations, especially the players, were also very compelling to watch. It had an almost like cartoon animation quality to it, also reminding me a bit of BioShock's animations. But here things would take a weird and nasty turn. For example, how you would reload your weapons or how you would interact with different objects and puzzles. I played the game with everything set on the highest settings, and the game did not disappoint. The fidelity and attention to detail of the textures was jaw-dropping, because I kept encountering things that I have never seen before in any other game. Although the game runs beautifully most of the time, it also suffers from a lot of stuttering, especially when the game is trying to load another section of the level. It can be quite noticeable and frankly annoying when it happens, but apart from that, the game ran nicely. But like in many other video games, the visuals and graphics are just half of the equation. To have such gory and upsetting visuals feel even more lively, the team had to make sure that they could elevate what you were seeing with equally disgusting and bone-chilling sound design. Fortunately, they delivered on the task so well that the sound ends up forming this symbiosis with the visuals, morphing into one. The sound ends up taking the mantle of the unnoticed element. It's there, but it doesn't try to get your attention to it. The music is also there, but it's almost so invisible that you barely notice it. Rarely does it try to surprise you with a new tone or melody, but rather it remains an intrinsic underlying layer to bring what you are seeing to life. The sound is very well designed overall, heightening every little action, every step you take, and every little movement made in the world. Much like the visuals, everything sounds disgusting, and even more, your weapons have nasty sounds. Your enemies not only look disgusting, but they also sound it. They go around attacking you by peeking at you, which also sounds terrible, and made me revolt and run the opposite way. Not only do the enemies sound repulsing, but also the world itself, and everything around it. When walking through the game, especially in the underground section, your steps sound like a vomited portion of a bloody porridge from 10 years ago. Even when reloading, your gun sounded like it's being penetrated by something squishy, and even though I must confess that, combined with a proper animation, there is a certain level of twisted satisfaction. But it's mighty disturbing as well. Your actions will have a little echo to it, and further reinforcing that you're alone and you're just this little thing in a world full of danger.
I have found my ideal so gentle.
So, this is where the game started to lose me. I feel like the game starts off very strong. It just drops you there without telling you where and why. But gradually this problem gets heightened and your questions never get any answers. And after a few hours it becomes clear that the game isn't really trying to say or suggest anything deeper than you initially thought. Everything in the game is just there for shock value and to get you disgusted, which mind you, works for the very first few hours. But after mindlessly going through obtuse and twisted labyrinths, it becomes appallingly clear that the game is like a Kardashian. One day, they might be wearing an interesting piece of fashion with a statement, and it seems like they're trying to say something really interesting, which they might, but in the end, it's all about the looks. In a way, you could say that it almost resembles the first few Tomb Raiders, where you go around through these strange and unseen places, solving puzzles, discovering keys and paths, going through labyrinths. But in that game, there's a purpose, and there's a reason why your character is in those places. There's a motive for why Lara is there, and the story has enough agency for you to keep playing. In Scorn, everything is just too damn ambiguous. There is no sense of rush or any reason besides your own morbid curiosity to actually keep going. You just go from room to room, almost like a walking simulator. And don't get me wrong, I love ambiguous and ambitious storytelling. I'm a big fan of David Lynch and artsy movies, and I love his filmography. And it consists of abstract stories and weird stuff. But like I said previously, the story around you is very ambiguous, and the game doesn't give you any answers to the questions that it poses. And with this being a first-person shooter, you could expect the events of the game to directly influence or evolve the protagonist, but he just ends up being a vehicle to be driven to the next set piece or beautiful location that the developers created. The game's pacing was also a little off-putting. I felt like the game was wrapping up after a puzzle inside a creature where you need to open 3 holes and then elevate it to kill it. After ascending from the depths of the underworld to where we fall in the beginning, I was feeling like the journey was coming to a close. Unfortunately, I was wrong, and from the last act, the game literally stumbles around to stretch the runtime a bit more, but without saying much more. Without spoiling the game, I did manage to take something from the little story that there is, which, like I said, it's all very much up to the player's own interpretation. I felt like the game was trying to tackle subjects like immortality and consciousness. It was interesting, but it stays very surface level, and it doesn't end up saying anything at all, just trying to shock you really. After gaining a bit more of insight into the story goals and design ideas with the art of Scorn, I can understand that perhaps there was this intention all along. It was all very well explained in that book, and I wish I had gained this information through the game and not by reading an art book that explains their intentions with the story. But what I was left with was so meaningless and tasteless that I even wondered why did I went through all the pains of combat and multiple frustrations just to get to this equally egregious ending. And oh yes, the gameplay, they normally say last but not least. Gameplay is Scorn's biggest flaw. And it's what made me take a week off from playing, even when I was trying to push myself through to make this review. You wake up in this weird room, weak and powerless, like I told you, going around solving puzzles while getting creeped out by the environments. And this was quite a pleasant experience, which is contradicting because it's a horror game, but looking back, I wish this was the whole gameplay. And after a few more puzzles, the game presents you with your first fighting chance, let's say, a melee weapon. An idea that came from a very disturbed person, or perhaps someone suffering from acute necrophilia. It shoots some kind of phallic object that hits your enemies when you are quite close to them. But already, this weapon presents some of Scorn's problems. Firstly, it only shoots in 2 bursts max that do little damage, and then you have to wait a hefty 10 seconds cooldown to attack again. It's a very slow process overall, and I found the best course of action was to attack and then retreat, to avoid taking damage. And 2/3 of Scorn was this, rinse and repeat. It became painstakingly annoying, because the combat seemed to be designed as an afterthought, lacking the obvious polish that the sound design and visuals have. Later in the game, you acquire a healing object that is something, again, out of another perverted mind. It's here where my frustration became even more prevalent. You see, the game is designed with the intent of total immersion, so things like tutorials, waypoints, and highlights are not part of the experience. It doesn't have any explicit way of teaching you and presenting new mechanics. It leaves all up for you to discover and to understand, which is quite a bold idea, let me say, considering the era of extreme waypoints and mindless HUD clutter present on modern games. Sadly, I had no way of referring to the game's manual like one would on the PlayStation 2 era. But EBB software didn't make any effort to teach you the new mechanics in a more active way that it doesn't include text saying press A to heal, which I've seen other games attempt cleverly and succeeding. The only times that there was any text on screen was the controls for the puzzle, which in my mind it was completely unnecessary. I know what the directional buttons are, thank you very much. And so, you are left with two options. Pause screen controls, or Google it. However, even after checking the controls, certain mechanics were not very clear to me. Also strangely, I also felt a noticeable increase in difficulty that left me wondering if I had missed something or I haven't been using my tools in the intended way. It was only too far into the game that I discovered, by googling it of course, that I had completely missed the pistol that I was supposed to have obtained halfway through the campaign. The game seemed to be punishing me for not finding a weapon that would help me fend off the increasingly bigger number of enemies that were showing up. So I just decided to completely avoid combat and run from them, because I just felt too damn naked, of course. I am highlighting this because it just made my experience that much more excruciating, but also because I am someone that always tries to explore every nook and cranny. Heck, my favorite game is Tomb Raider, a game about uncovering relics and obsessing about every unchecked corner for a secret or an item, and the same can also be said about Resident Evil. So when I found out that I missed the weapon, not once, not twice, but 3 times, it made me realize that maybe this was my problem. And Google also confirms it. After getting through that painful part in the most obvious of ways, the game just hands me a shotgun. And I'm only left wondering if this is a magical demonstration of ingenious game design couldn't have been applied a few hours ago. So, a few puzzles and beautifully designed disgusting locations, and nearing the end, the game just gives you a middle finger and says fight. Honestly, I just don't know how many times I had to repeat this boss fight. It was total, pardon my French, bullshit. Either because the game was going glitchy and not getting my inputs, because I would run out of ammo at the most crucial of times, because of the overpowered nature of the creature that I was fighting against, because of the clunkiness of the combat system, because of the little space that there was to maneuver around, or just because of silly game design. In the first part of the boss, he has a grenade launcher that he fires in bursts that, unsurprisingly, do a lot of damage. Fortunately, he wasn't that bright, so he would miss a lot of the times. But lo and behold, when his grenades would explode near him, severe case of immortality. And what's even more funny is that the second part of this boss fight consists of you grabbing his grenade launcher and using it against him. Sorry about my rant about the gameplay, but I do think that there was probably a good idea behind the combat, no doubt, and it seems like they wanted to follow Resident Evil's approach of survival horror, like dropping you into a world defenseless, and through the course of the game you just get more and more powerful and overcome fears. But it just didn't translate that well, and the team couldn't make gameplay systems work properly. I must say that after my second playthrough, some of the issues were mitigated, but just because I was already familiar with the game's multiple kinks and odd design choices. The combat still felt like a slog to go through, and the pistol was not an easy thing to find. I think that the game would have been more successful if it had followed the same approach as The Witness, but still retaining some light combat elements, like some creative boss fighting. After all, we're not here for the combat, and frankly, I just expected a walking simulator. And I just wanted to take in the ugly beauty of the environments and discover more of the game and the world itself. Scorn is a beautiful recreation of H.R. Geiger's ideas. It's a love letter to the first Alien film and a disturbing visual tale of sacrifice and torture. I was enchanted by the world, the walls, the gore, the shock value, how it made me so scared, and its overall design. It was all that an Alien fan like me could really hope for. Unfortunately, Scorn is not a painting, but an interactive experience and a game where it demands that you interact directly with its own world. And that is just where it stumbles to succeed. The gameplay is just a chore, especially the combat side. Like I mentioned previously, I would have been perfectly satisfied if the game had stuck to puzzle solving and light combat or even stealth. And frankly, it would have been much more in line with the story and what it's trying to tell, where you're just a defenseless body trying to survive against all odds. But the basic aspect of the game, which is what you do, is flawed. And well, it just defeats the purpose of being a video game. But for all its shortcomings, Scorn can still be appreciated for what it is. A rare experiment to channel one's twisted nightmares into reality. And maybe I'm just being too damn harsh on the game. And in a few years, it might even be shed a light on all of that it did right, or even gain a cult following, I don't know. But until then, this is Edming, signing off. Wow, you're still here? Guys, I have to thank you so much for watching, and just leave a like and comment if you don't agree or if you agree with something that I said. I would love to hear your guys' takes on this game. So if you guys enjoyed this review, subscribe to see more. I've definitely got another review planned coming very soon. So if you don't want to miss out on that, just subscribe and just ring the bell for the notifications so you can be the first ones to watch the next one. Until then, I'll see you guys.